In this video, I really want to talk about fishing a swim jig. A swim jig to me is one of the best tools that we have as an angler to simply cover a ton of water. I mean, you can reel a swim jig in very fast. You can be very efficient out there on the water. And I think that covering water is one of the best things that you can do to learn how to locate fish and start catching a lot of fish. Now, when it comes to swim jig fishing, there's a couple of things that I think some guys put too much of an emphasis on. I think there's some things that guys don't put enough emphasis on. And so in this video, we're going to talk about those things. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. Right now, over at Fin Fishing, I've decided to run the May package early. So it's actually live over on the website. You can get a USA made sun shirt and a duck hat for $75. So I have 10 different colors of sun shirts. I have 2 different colored duck hats. And so you can kind of mix and match as you please. So all you gotta do, add the sun shirt to cart, add the duck hat to cart, and it will automatically discount at checkout. Shopping at Fin Fishing is one of the best ways to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, let's talk a little bit about the swim jig. Now, when it comes to the swim jig, one of the biggest things that I think guys put way too big of an emphasis on is actually the trailer that we put on these swim jigs. I don't always believe that a trailer on the back of a swim jig, one trailer versus another trailer, is going to get you that many more bites. I think that at times it will, you know, and if you guys have been around this channel, you know, like, even in business, there's the 80-20 rule, and I think that that applies to a lot of things that we do in fishing. And I think about 80% of the time, it really doesn't matter what trailer you put on, whether you put a twin-tailed grub versus a chigger crawl versus a swim bait style trailer. I don't think it matters. I think you will catch the same fish. Now, the thing that a trailer does do, which I think that guys don't put enough emphasis on, is it impacts the speed at which you fish the bait. And to me, when it comes to fishing a swim jig, I think that speed is like the #1 thing. I think that when you're fishing a swim jig at times, sometimes making that bait go super fast through the water column is like the deal to get bites. Because what you're doing when it's coming through the water column very, very fast, just below the surface, is you are enticing a reaction strike. You are causing a fish that is not normally going to bite a bait for whatever reason. Maybe he's in a bad mood, or maybe he's been caught recently, or maybe it's just getting into the summertime when fish tend to see a lot of baits and you really have to make them react. I think that sometimes speed absolutely kills with a swim jig. And so sometimes, depending on what type of trailer you put on there, it will impact the speed of your bait. For example, you get some of those crawl style baits that have a lot of flip and flap to them. They tend to slow your bait down. They have a lot of drag, and it's going to cause that bait to slow down in the water column. Where other times you might have a bait that doesn't have as much flip and flopping, or maybe it has tiny pinchers, something like a speed crawl. You can reel that through the water column really fast. It's not going to impact the speed of that bait quite as much. And so to me, speed is a really, really big deal. Now, sometimes it's really about making that bait go fast. Other times it's really about making that bait go as slow as you can. And this is actually something that, you know, kind of happens a lot for me during the spawn, which, depending on where you live in the country, I feel like the whole country is kind of in that phase right now where there's a lot of fish that are moving up shallow. They're setting up on beds. And one of the best things that you can do when fish are on beds or set up shallow and about to bed is fish a swim jig really slow. So in that situation, one, you could put a bigger trailer on the back of that really slows that bait down. Also, using a lighter swim jig is really key in this situation. Going from, you know, typically my all-around go-to swim jig is a 3/8 ounce. A lot of times during the spawn, I'm going to use a 1/4 ounce, which may not sound like that big of a difference, but I'm telling you, if you cast the exact same 2 baits out with the exact same trailer out, and one's a 1/4 ounce versus a 3/8 ounce, you have to fish that 1/4 ounce about half the speed to kind of keep it in the same water column. And during the spawn, when those fish are kind of setting up, I really like to fish that bait slow. Now, when it is spawning time, you're not always going to get every fish to actually commit to that bait. They'll come up there and they'll swirl at that bait But then it kind of helps you to pinpoint exactly where their beds are, where then maybe you can pitch a Texas rig in and catch them. But to me, speed is a big thing. In the middle of summer, when fish aren't spawning or anything like that, I play with the speed of baits a lot. I will say that most of the time I am bringing that bait in really fast, but every now and then I'll try to fish a swim jig slow to see what kind of reaction I can get. And sometimes it's a slow thing. Sometimes it's just an experiment out there to see what the bass like as far as the speed of the bait. But to me, that's one of the most important things when it comes to the swim jig. Now, the other thing that I think is really important to remember about a swim jig is that a swim jig is a very good replacement for a chatterbait, a square bill, a lipless crankbait, and a spinnerbait. All those baits that I just listed are pretty loud, obnoxious baits. And during certain times of the year, the bass will absolutely slam those type of baits. They will absolutely crush them. You know, for me, like in the pre-spawn, it seems like fish really like that vibration. Sometimes during the post-spawn they do. Sometimes if you go out to the lake and you just have a lot of windy conditions, maybe dark conditions out there, it seems like the bass really like those louder baits. Now, when you get to the lake and it's sunny and it's slick calm, a lot of those fish are gonna remain in some of those exact same areas that you were catching them on with the chatterbait, with the spinnerbait, with the lipless crankbait. But instead of throwing those louder, more obnoxious lures, one of the best baits that you can follow up with is a swim jig. Throw it in the exact same places. You're gonna fish it almost the exact same way. Like if you're throwing a swim jig, if you're throwing a spinnerbait around wood cover and all of a sudden it goes slick calm, throw that swim jig instead and you will continue to get bites. It's just a lot more subtle of a lure. And in tough conditions and silent conditions, it will still trigger bites from bass that are in those areas that won't hit baits like a chatterbait, like a spinnerbait. You know, so I like to fish it kind of on a little bit deeper, like offshore grass, not like real deep. I typically don't fish a swim jig like over 10 foot deep, but a lot of times I'm gonna use a chatterbait when I'm fishing in like 6, 7, 8, 9 foot of water when you kind of have sparse grass. Again, if you have slick calm conditions, they don't always eat that chatterbait, and a great bait to follow up is a swim jig. Throw it in the exact same ways, cast it out there. The biggest difference when I'm fishing a swim jig a little bit deeper is I'm gonna mess around with my line size a lot more. Typically, if I'm fishing a little bit deeper, I'm gonna step down to fluorocarbon and I'm gonna go down to 15-pound fluorocarbon. That allows me to get that bait a lot deeper without kind of fighting the resistance of the line. And so when it comes to a swim jig, fishing in a little bit deeper water, just remember that. That'll help you to keep that bait down. Also, you can go to a little bit heavier swim jig. Going to a 1/2 ounce swim jig will help obviously keep that bait down as well. But when it comes to swim jigs, those are some of the most important things that I can think of. Speed is huge. Also remembering it as a follow-up bait when the fish stop biting. Also, it doesn't even have to be like a crazy condition change. Sometimes you go over a grass flat with the chatterbait and you catch a ton of fish, and then you go back through it and you don't catch like hardly anything. I can almost guarantee that probably a small percentage of the population that actually lives there actually bit. And so you can just go back through that and still catch them on a swim jig a lot of times, just because, again, it's more subtle of a bait. It doesn't always have to be a huge condition change. So guys, I hope that you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.